What's up, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Play Hard and Love Big Radio. My name is Nick Clark, and I'm your host for today's show. And I have an amazing guest with me. I can't wait to introduce her and share her with you. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is the official podcast of Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup Shop based out of Folsom, California. If you're watching the video version of this, you can see the beautiful Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup right behind Sarah. So check us out at spotteddogyoga.com. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is dedicated to bringing you the inspirational people and inspirational stories to help you connect to your center and to go out and live your life to the fullest. And our guest today, Sarah Correa, is here to do just that. My friend, you are inspiring. Welcome to Play Hard and Love Big Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Sarah, in the last couple of years, has really gotten into yoga at Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup. The form that you filled out before we did the podcast, one of the things that you said is that one of the ways that you love big is by showing up for your friends and family when they really need you. I think that just says a whole lot about you, Sarah. Where are you from? What are you doing in the Sacramento area? What's your scoop? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Albany, New York, kind of like upstate New York. I went to college at the University of Michigan, and then I moved to California originally in a PhD program for economics, but kind of relatively quickly realized that was not for me. So I withdrew, but loved California, kind of discovered running, fell in love with that, and then kind of like fell into the grocery industry, and now I work in the running industry. As Nick said, I discovered yoga last summer at Spotted Dog, and it's helped me in so many ways, both to feel centered physically, but as well as mentally.
What I would love to hear about is about your love for running. Some words that you use to describe yourself are determination, adaptability, resilience, and creativity. And all four of those words are phenomenal words. How much of those things that make up who you are have come from what you've learned from running?
You need a lot of determination to be in running. Both the physical act of actually running can be uncomfortable. If you're doing it right, you're probably going to feel uncomfortable. And the runner's high doesn't always happen. I would say it doesn't happen that frequently, honestly. So resiliency, determination in the act of running is real. And also, too, just the commitment to training, waking up early, like trying to fit it into, everyone has busy schedules. But I've also found in other aspects of my life, like running has been a release for me from the stresses of daily life, determination, resilience. Outside of running, going on 4 years sober. So my life before my sober time was difficult, and I had a lot of resiliency in that regard. And running was always something I did even before I got sober, but, it was starting to suffer and take a back seat as I dealt with, different forms of addiction and things like that. And it's interesting now in my recovery, I found that running plays a big aspect in my recovery. It can't be the only part. Yoga, running, those things are very important, but it have to be spiritually aligned as well. Running is a huge aspect of both my physical and my mental health.
It's been healing for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You said earlier that you kind of fell into running and fell in love with running. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. How did you decide to do your first run? And then how did it end up getting to where it is now, where you're running ultras and going on vacation in Alaska and on the stops, going on these awesome runs? Like, how did you fall in love with it?
Growing up, my dad was a runner. Sadly, our running never overlapped because by the time I got into it, he had already, was having a lot of physical issues. So sadly, he can't run any longer. But so I was always aware of running when I was a kid. I didn't want to do it. I hated running in high school. The mile was the worst. I had other forms of exercise that I did. I did a lot of horseback riding, which was my first passion. And I also did crew, so rowing, which is really popular on the East Coast. Then in college, I did start to run, but my relationship with my body at that time was not healthy. So running was not joyous for me. Running was something I had to do to feel like I could eat, or, just it was a compulsion. So I would have to go to the gym and run literally every day. After college, when I started to recover from that, negative headspace around food and my body, I didn't exercise for like a few years. But then, something happened. I think I was like 23, 24, and I realized I just didn't feel well. And I was like, I should try it again. Maybe I'll like it again. And so I kind of made a commitment to try to start running, but to do it in a way that, gave my body a break when I needed it, and try to separate the link between, food and exercise. Like, fueling is very important when you're exercising, but on the flip side, you don't need to exercise to eat. Everyone needs to eat. It's not about being able to deserve to eat. So that was a hard cycle for me to break. But once I started getting into running again, I could only run like 2 minutes at a time. This was also too, when I was in my active addiction with alcohol. So I was drinking a lot and not exercising. The running did help, once I got into it, to kind of curb the alcohol use a little bit, but it wasn't until, I got sober and made a commitment to my sobriety that my running, really benefited. I ran my first half marathon in 2015 in Sacramento, just got hooked, and then it escalated very quickly. Like, I do have an addictive personality, so it kind of took off. And what I've had to learn in running is that, as much as I love it, my addictive personality, it has to take a back seat, because like, you got to know when to give your body a break. You got to know when to let yourself recover, or you're going to push yourself into injuries. And every runner, it's the classic, they do that first ramp up, they get their first injury, and they're like, oh no, like, what the heck is going on? So I've had that happen to me several times, but now I know my body very well, and I know when things are starting to pop up and how to kind of address those issues before it turns into a big injury. But yeah, 2016, ran my first 50-kilometer race, the Way Too Cool, which is a really popular, like, first 50K for people in the area. Then I did a couple more 50Ks, ran a couple of 50-milers in 2020, and then ran my 100-kilometer race, which is like a 62-mile race, in 2021, Canyons. And that's been my longest ultramarathon to date. Fortunately, all the yoga has helped get my body really healthy. So I'm hoping to do a 50-miler in September of this year.
It's phenomenal. Sarah lives in Folsom, but about how far away from the studio do you live?
Most direct route is like 4.2 miles, 4.25.
And then what's the least direct route?
However long you want to make it.
How many circles you want to do around a certain neighborhood?
No, I mean, because you can go out, sometimes I'll go out and run all the way around Lake Natoma, and then up and around Johnny Cash, and then come here. And that would be like 14 miles. So I've done that before. And then I might run back the short way.
Okay.
But there have been other times where I did the short way, took a class, and then ran another 16 after, because I wanted to do 20 for the day. And the yoga was a way to keep my body feeling really good during the run. And I know I won't have the patience to do it on my own, so I like coming to the studio.
Yeah, it makes a difference to do things with a group, and to show up as a way of being, in a way, holding yourself accountable. When I first met Sarah, when I first met her, she had run, I don't know how long you had run, but from your house, and you just rolled out your mat, and then you packed up and you ran back. I was like, this lady is amazing.
You guys are awesome, and let me use a mat when I run to and from, because I don't want to be running with a mat rolled up. But
That'd make it harder.
They know, like, when I get here and I'm already sweaty and stuff, I'm like, oh, I need a mat. And they're like, sure. Yeah.
So how does it feel doing a class like that in the middle of a run?
My training for running has never been traditional. I don't know many runners who would want to stop a run and take a yoga class in the middle, but I've always done things a little differently. I've always had a relatively low mileage program. For the distance of races that I do, I don't run that many miles. I think it's a misconception people have that like you need to run big miles. And by big miles, I'm saying like 80 miles a week plus. Very, very common for people training for marathons or ultra marathons. That's never worked for me. I will peak in my training at like 80 to 90 miles, like on the trails. But typically for me, I'm running like 50 to 60, I would say, and even 40 to 50. And when I did both my 50 milers, which I did really well in, I was only running like 200 miles a month. For ultra person, that's not a lot. So my training has never been super traditional high volume training, but I put in the hours doing other things. So like other forms of cardio, a lot of weightlifting and a lot of yoga. In terms of hours each week, yoga is my second biggest discipline, like by volume of hours. I usually do 5 to 6 hours of yoga a week, like 5 to 6 classes, or if I can't get to the studio at home. So I enjoy breaking up the disciplines. I mean, there's a term for it. It's called a brick workout. A brick workout is just when you combine two disciplines back to back. So for runners, it's very frequently it's running and biking. So they'll like do a long run and then do a long bike if they're training for a triathlon, or they'll like swim and then run. So I just do my brick workout, run, yoga, run. Or the most common is I come to the 5:30 a.m. class, do a class, and then just run immediately after. That is my favorite thing to do. It just gets your body so ready to run, because it's not just flexibility that you're doing in yoga. It is a critical combination of flexibility and mobility, two things that runners notoriously lack. Running is an extremely repetitive motion, and what happens is our bodies are too smart. They start to learn that repetitive motion, and they build up all of this fibrous connective tissue called fascia that just starts to lock us up over time. You know, it's what happened to my dad. He got very, very locked up. He ran his same 6 to 7 miles on the road every single day, no days off, did his sit-ups, did his push-ups, and that was his only range of motion. You know, flexibility is very important, especially after you run, more of that static stretching. But if you don't have the mobility component, then you are still going to have weaknesses and imbalances. You know, I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between mobility and flexibility. Flexibility is just like, you know, touch your toes. It's static stretching. Mobility is how you can control your body through an entire range of motion. An example of mobility would be like a pistol squat, like you are going all the way down, supporting yourself on one ankle. It requires a lot of ankle flexibility to do a pistol squat. It always also requires a lot of strength and control in your body. So you need flexibility to do mobility, but they're not interchangeable. And yoga has both, which is so important, because I've tried just stretching and it doesn't work for me the way that yoga does. And I think that's another misconception too, that yoga is just stretching.
Totally. Yeah. Or that you have to be flexible to do yoga.
It improves as you do the practice. When I started a year ago, I couldn't do most of the things that I do now. I love improvement. I love seeing improvement over time. It's been really cool to see how my body has changed and literally physically changed from yoga practice.
I know you're working on all of the poses and the flow as a whole, but are there some specific ones that you're really getting into right now?
All the poses are so beneficial to runners, but for me, who has had a lot of hip and knee issues, patellar tendonitis, IT band syndrome, it stems from having tight hips and glutes. I think one of the most single important poses that we do is the half pigeon pose. So I've been working on half pigeon, both passive and active. So kind of another example between flexibility and mobility. Flexibility would just be, you know, resting in half pigeon pose. Not resting, I mean, it doesn't feel like rest. An active version of that would be to try to do almost like sit-ups in the half pigeon pose. So you're kind of like going down with your upper body and then coming back up, and that makes it active. It's pretty difficult. So it's the other really cool thing about yoga is you're doing things on both sides. So it just throws into sharp relief the asymmetries that we have in our body. You could be a lot more locked up on one side versus the other, and you may not realize it until you start trying to do these poses. The other thing I'm working on, which I had like a breakthrough with, is like the tripod, like classic headstand. For a while, I was just able to do like the tripod one. Now I'm able to do classic headstands. So I'm getting there.
Those are fun too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk about how you breathe when you're running and also the correlation between the breath that we use in yoga and in running? So when we teach at Spotted Dog, typically in a class, we teach what's called Ujjayi breath, which is a breath that is moved in and out of your nose with a slight constriction at the back of your throat. There's a lot of reasons why we use that. One is to slow down your mind. Another is to help heat up your body. Another is to create some noise so that you can get anchored in by listening to the sound of your breath. Another is so that you have a little bit more control and you can use your breath to move your body. Do you see that translate into your running, and how has breath made a difference in your running?
Ujjayi breathing, I think that you were teaching a class and you actually like made it click for me. Basically, anytime you're kind of in a more rising pose, you're breathing in. And then when you're kind of going back down to the earth, you're breathing out. For me, it's a way to stay very present. Sometimes you can start to zone out a little bit too much in yoga, especially if like you might know where the poses are going, and then you can really tell if you zoned out because they might change it and you're doing something else, and then you're like, oh shoot. But yeah, the ujjayi breath keeps me very present. How it translates to running, you get cardiovascular adaptation just the more you run, so it helps you control your breath a little bit. In yoga, I'm actively working on my breath. It's something that I consciously am thinking about. I might be able to do the one breath in, one breath out per pose, but I forget sometimes to try to make the physical sound, but it really does make you more present and create that heat. With running, I'm not consciously thinking about my breath as much, but I do think that the practice from yoga does translate. I would say less about breath and almost more about balance, especially trail running. That's the biggest correlation I've seen is all of the balance work that we do in yoga, the single leg, like isometric loading, all of that like deep work in the calf muscles and the soleus muscles that translates to running so well, especially trail running. Like you think about it, like you're on one foot, you're on the other foot, you're always kind of balancing. The terrain is technical at some points, you're hopping around, and I feel a lot more secure and stable from the yoga practice that I've done.
So when I did a workshop with you at Gold Country Run and Sport, we talked a lot about alignment. Mm-hmm. And just like little movements that you can make in your body to create more alignment in everything that you're doing. When you're running, do you spend some time while you're running adjusting the alignment of your body as you're running?
Running form is very important. And when you look at elite runners or runners who are very efficient, it's beautiful to watch them. But the thing about running form is it's not something that you can very effectively consciously change, even if you're aware of what your issues are, because most of the problems with your running form stem from a lack of mobility and flexibility. The way my physical therapist described it to me is we're going to improve your mobility and flexibility, which is, ultimately what Spy Dog Yoga helped me with a lot more than physical therapy, actually. But through doing all of these poses and just vastly improving my hip mobility, my ankle mobility, all of these things, then the improvements in your running form will follow without you even really having to consciously think about it. One thing I do consciously think about, though, is my pelvic tilt. I was very prone to like over having too much pelvic tilt, throwing my hips forward, and then basically not holding any control in my core, which puts a lot of pressure on the low back. And it's interesting because now when I run, over time it has changed and I have a lot more core strength from doing core exercises and yoga and actively, working on my pelvic tilt, that now like sometimes I'll like throw it out for a few strides how it used to be. And it's like, oh my God, that feels awful. But yeah, overall, like issues with running form can't just be addressed by trying to run differently. You've got to put in the work to increase your mobility and flexibility, and then they will improve.
I love that you're talking about this. So valuable for people that are listening in to us. Thank you.
Yeah.
For somebody who is wanting to get into running but has never done it before, really literally they're like, I want to do some running, I'm inspired by Sarah, what she's talking about, what would you say would be the first step for them to start their running journey?
I would say what happens with most people is they try to get into it a little too quickly. Temper your expectations. It's going to feel crappy the first 2 weeks, unless you're already, if you're coming at it with a good cardiovascular base from like other forms of cardio, you'll still be sore in your legs because I run a lot, but when I bike, I get sore. Like it's just different. Like they all kind of help each other. But if you're coming with a good cardiovascular base, you probably won't feel that like burning in your chest as much, but you're still going to be sore. But if this is maybe like the first cardio you've done in a while, just be ready for a lot of walk running. When I first started, I would run for about 2 to 3 minutes and then walk for 2 to 3 minutes and then run. And then when I was able to run my first 2 miles without stopping, I was very excited. Once you get to that point, that like 2, 3 week mark, it'll get a lot easier pretty quickly. And then the kind of classic thing people fall into is they ramp up their mileage very fast, especially if they're younger. I've noticed that. But really, like any kind of running manual, the kind of classic rule is try not to increase your training volume in terms of miles by more than 10% a week. So if you ran like 4 miles last week, you should probably only run 4.5, like max 5 miles the next week. And you'll get there. And the other thing too is just make sure you have appropriate shoes. It's very common for me at my job at Gold Country to have a person come in who has already got, I started getting to running. I just had these like $50 Nike shoes or whatever kind of shoes. And like my shins hurt a lot. I've been running for a couple months and I just did my first long run. They've already started running longer in shoes that probably aren't made to do that activity. And they've already started to get some negative consequences from that. So definitely, if you want to get into running, like make the investment and buy a good pair of shoes and get fitted for a good pair of shoes. There are hundreds of shoes out there. So clearly, like not every shoe is going to work for every person. So I would say, yeah, come in, like get fitted for a good pair of shoes.
So yeah, you want to seek out experts like Sarah
Mhm.
and the people that you work with. Let's transition and talk a little bit about Gold Country Run and Sport. Tell us about your job with them. How are things going? That Gold Country Run and Sport has been one of my favorite businesses in the community ever since we started Spotted Dog 11 years ago for a lot of different reasons. But from your perspective, how are things going? What's the culture like? Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, I love working for Gold Country. I've been running pretty intensely since like 2015, as I said earlier. And, I had a friend who worked at the company, which is how I was introduced to the owner. We're like a Fleet Feet, but independently owned. In 2013, our owner founder, his name's Don, he actually pitched a franchise business plan to Fleet Feet and was rejected. I think at that time, maybe the corporation like didn't believe that El Dorado Hills and Folsom, they didn't see the potential for growth. And clearly like that has happened. So he just said, okay, well, I'll start my own running store. And I think that's pretty badass. So he started Gold Country Run and Sports, or independently owned. He's still very involved in the business. I kind of do his day to day as GM across the 3 stores. We have a store in Folsom, El Dorado Hills, and then recently we just opened in Rockland as well. But yeah, it's a great culture. I love working there. We get all sorts of types of people that come into Gold Country. You definitely don't need to be a runner to shop there. We do a lot of medical referrals. So people who have, significant mobility or pain issues, they're coming to us to get, everything like insoles, recovery footwear, walking shoes, like you name it. So even if you're a walker, make the investment in yourself and get a good pair of shoes. My generation, the millennial generation, I think from a young age, we are aware of the importance of good footwear. And I think that too, we don't, especially women, maybe don't feel as much pressure to wear these shoes that are just not good for your feet. Maybe not high heels every day, like wearing appropriate footwear. But previous generations, I don't think that was so much the case. Like there just wasn't as much knowledge about foot health and body mechanics, and also the shoes just didn't exist. Like shoes have come so far in the last 20, even 10 years. So we see a lot of older people who have really serious foot issues because of footwear that they've been wearing for decades. So we have to temper their expectations as well. Like, we can hopefully alleviate some pain, but unfortunately at that point, it's hard to undo, decades of things that have gone on with your feet. But I'm hopeful that, my generation, even our parents' generation, and the next generations, like, we're very aware of this health from a young age. So hopefully we don't end up with, like, as many bunions and just gnarly things that can happen to your feet when you're just putting yourself into shoes that are not how your foot naturally wants to be.
True. My mom has a bunion.
It's way more common in women. A big factor is, wearing pointed shoes that push the toes together, and your foot just starts to get into a shape that's not natural. Your toes are not supposed to be together. They're supposed to have some separation. A foot is not pointy.
In at yoga, we focus a lot on foot alignment, lift the toes, spread the toes. I remember when I first got into yoga, I had a friend who gave me toe socks. They had like
Mm-hmm.
little, they have like little, I don't know what they're, cotton things in between each toe. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm just going to sleep with these on. Right. Well, I played soccer and I used to shove my feet into tight shoes all the time. And so my feet were like bent. They had formed towards each other
Mm-hmm.
over time because they were just crammed into a small spot like you're talking about. So I threw these socks on and I'm laying in bed and I fall asleep. And then at 2 a.m, I like jumped up and I was having foot cramps. So it's like
Yeah.
my feet were just not used to being in that form, which is more natural. Right. And so I know for myself personally that a lot of the issues that I've had through my body over the years have come from poor maintenance of my feet and keeping my toes active and spread like that. The other thing that's so great about you being on this podcast is that I feel like really is creating a welcoming space for people to go in and see you and see the people at Gold Country Run and Sport. My experiences of learning to be a bicycle rider, being, a fisherman, is that right from the beginning of learning, for some reason, there's this timidness that I've had about going into a store and asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to
Yeah.
be a begin. It's okay to be a beginner walker. It's okay to be a beginner runner, to not know anything. That's why people like Sarah are here. That's why I'm here. That's why, people are experts in their field. And I just really feel like on this podcast, you've done a great job creating a welcoming space for people. And I hope that people come in and see you at Gold Country Run and Sport.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, come see us. Like, all of our staff, we all love running. And we have people who are doing other disciplines besides running too. Like, not everyone is an ultra runner. Like, that wouldn't be a very welcoming atmosphere. We need people who are doing other things too. So we have other people who do yoga. We have people who play football or lift at the gym. And, footwear is equally important at the gym and doing other things as well. So it's not so much that we're all like runners, but we're all very conscious of how important it is to be able to move well. And that's kind of what I was saying too. Like, you don't have to be a runner to shop there. Everyone deserves to be able to move well and move without pain. Hopefully prevent bigger issues down the line by getting into good footwear, insoles, socks, everything now. We also have a lot of like recovery tools like massage guns, CBD oil, the UFOS footwear, which has really been taking off lately. So if you're curious about trying UFOS and like why there are so many people talking about it, we have lots of those.
Let's talk about UFOS real quick. Are they sandals or shoes or what are they?
And after yoga today, I ran 12 miles with like 5 repeats of Costco Hill. So I've got like my recovery footwear. They just have a really, really thick foam heel and it molds to your foot. So really, really good arch support. It feels like you're almost kind of stepping into wet sand, that kind of nice little give. And it just kind of surrounds your foot and feels really good. So that was the original purpose. It was to be recovery footwear for athletes after hard efforts. And then they realized, like everyone could benefit from this. They say about 80 to 85% shock absorption versus traditional flip flops. So everyone can benefit from those.
I mean, my feet are tired from chasing my kids around all morning.
Yeah.
I could use some UFOs. Just the fact you just showed me those
Yeah.
and talked about them make me want to have them on my feet right
Yeah.
now.
They're fun.
That's amazing. Okay, one more thing, Sarah, is that at Gold Country Run and Sport, you all do community events. You do community runs, walks, different things like that. You showcase different products and companies. Again, I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's really important to have a community to do things with. So people, you have a community to do some walking and some running and get expertise from at a Gold Country Run and Sport, and Sarah and Dawn over there. Is there anything you want to speak to about the community culture at Gold Country Run and Sport?
Yeah. We have a run club and it's free to join. You can find
Cool.
the link through our website. It's just Gold Country Running and Racing. And we post on it. We have a private Facebook page that we post all of our events. So just for the run club, we do a first Saturday run. We meet at Karen's in Folsom. We also just started I think it's second Wednesday trail run. So if you can't do a morning run, you could do evening trail run. There's also runs that are open to like everyone, even if you're not in our run club. So we do monthly pub runs through the summer. So we just had one last night at Out of Bounds Brewery in Folsom. Next month, we're going to Moxa Barrel House in Roseville with On running those funny shoes with like the holes in the sole that are really popular. Garmin will be out there too if you want to try some Garmin watches. And we got a Halloween one already lined up. It's going to be a Halloween costume glow run with Hoka. Hoka always brings out, attracts a lot of people. It's our number one brand. It's one of the top brands in run specialty right now. So lots of fun. And then every Sunday we do runs from our Folsom and our Rockland store. So it's all different levels, all different ages. So there's definitely a lot of ways to get involved, varying distances and stuff too. So
Right on. That's so cool. And for you and I, we have to reconnect about doing a yoga and a run
definitely.
based out of the powerhouse down on
Yeah,
in Old
that sounds
Folsom.
awesome.
Yeah, we've got the connections to make it happen, and we're going to make it happen. So we'll have to get together and do some yoga and some running coming soon. All right, Sarah. Hey, thank you so much for being a part of Play Hard and Love Big Radio. Everyone, Play Hard and Love Big Radio is the official podcast of Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup Shop, which is where Sarah is right now, all by her lonesome, getting her zen on in this podcast. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is dedicated to bringing you the inspirational people and the inspirational stories that will help you connect to your center and live your life full of purpose and passion. And Sarah, you most definitely have been one of those people and have brought those stories with you today. Thank you so much for being a part of our program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my running and yoga journey. And I'm just, it's pretty incredible how broken I was kind of physically when I started this practice a year ago, and just the immense benefits I've reaped just from doing it on a consistent basis. If I'd known about yoga 3 years ago, I'm pretty confident all the setbacks I've had in those 2 years, like, probably wouldn't have happened. So it's something that, like, any active person, whether anyone who's doing any kind of repetitive motion, or even not even if you're an athlete, just sitting at a desk all day is not how people are made to exist. So getting out of that just small range of motion we find ourselves in, I can't speak enough about how awesome Spotted Dog has been to me and all the people who are connected with it. It's great.
Right on. Thank you. That means a lot to me. We really do believe in the product that we produce, and it affirms our creation when you speak to it, and I really appreciate that. Hey, for all the listeners, this show's been growing. It's been amazing. We were just talking about the numbers right before, but this obviously is making a difference for you in your life. So if you have anybody in your life that you think could benefit from this show or learn from what Sarah has had to share today, please share the show. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple, and all the major podcast platforms. If you prefer to watch it on video, you can watch it on video on Spotify, but we also produce these episodes on our YouTube channel. So check out Spotted Dog Yoga on YouTube, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you know when we go live and put up new episodes of Play Hard and Love Big Radio. Hey, everyone, and Sarah, thank you very much. Have an amazing rest of your day.
You too.
Peace out, my friend.